I'm a Deputy Director of Events here at Politics and Prose. Um, Before we get going, can I ask you all to please silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event? And when we get time for the Q&A, we're going to ask you to line up at a microphone right here. Some of you can't see it. It's hidden behind the white pillar. So come up to the microphone, ask your question into it, because we are filming today. And it will then live on our Politics and Prose YouTube channel. So you can find it there. You can tell your friends about it and share that. And when the event concludes, we're going to have a signing right here at this table. So you can line up at that pillar, and we'll get your names for personalizations. And then once the event is done, if you could fold up your chairs and lean them against the shelves, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So now, without further ado, we are excited to celebrate Bárbara Mujica for her new book, Miss Del Rio, a novel of Dolores Del Rio, the first major Latina star in Hollywood. Bárbara Mujica is the best-selling author of 5 novels, including Frida, which was translated into 18 languages. She is also an award-winning short story writer and essayist whose work has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, among others. And she just recently won the Jaime Prize for Women, Religious, and Epistolary Exchange and the Carmelite Reform. Mujica will be in conversation with Dominica Radulescu, the Edwin A. Morris Professor of Comparative Literature at Washington and Lee University. She is the author of 3 nationally and internationally acclaimed novels, a playwright, and a Fulbright scholar. She is currently working on her 4th novel, My Father's Orchards, and 2 new plays. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bárbara Mujica and Dominica Radulescu.
Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many new and so many familiar faces. I think that you should just go ahead and start.
Okay, well, hello. Good evening, everybody. I'm so honored to be invited in conversation with my dear friend and collaborator for many years, Bárbara Mujica. I have adored this book, and Bárbara, you are such a force of nature and such a powerhouse of creativity, of talent, and it's impressive. We have also had very important and wonderful collaborations. We have worked on, you've contributed to my anthology on refugees, and I've contributed to your anthology, Collateral Damage. So I feel very fortunate to know you and to be here tonight.
The feeling is mutual.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to start by asking you about the main character, of course, Dolores Del Rio. You have always, in your novels, chosen to write about extremely powerful and complex female character. And this is definitely one such character, Dolores Del Rio. So I'd like to ask you what drew you to her, to this person, to her personality, to her history, and how you went about researching for her life. You say you mentioned some of the things at the end of the book in your afterword, but I think it would be wonderful to hear a little bit more of a detailed, elaborate explanation from you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been interested in Dolores Del Rio for a long time. I became really interested in her when I wrote Frida. Dolores Del Rio was part of the entourage in Mexico. of this very artistic group: Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, Tina Molotti, all these very, very artistic people. And Dolores del Rio, they called her Lola. Her friends called her Lola. She was part of that group, and she, on the other hand, on the one hand, she was like them. She was very interested in advancing Mexican culture and art, but she was very different from Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo was very brazen. She liked to shock people. She liked to say things that were inappropriate. She'd go to parties and she'd greet the hostess and she'd say some obscenity. And she'd say, "Oh, I didn't know what that meant in English. I thought that meant hello." So Dolores del Rio was just the opposite. She had a very strong sense of decorum. She was known for being very elegant. She was a fashion icon, so she was very different. She had a small part in the novel, a cameo role, let's say, in the novel Frida. But when I was working with that material, and also I was teaching a course in Mexican history, in Latin American history, with an emphasis on Mexico. Lola always struck me as a very, very interesting character, not only because she was, very, very glamorous and very different from Frida in many ways, but also because she was such a resilient woman. She had this quality of resilience. She actually met with one obstacle after the other. She was married at 16 to Jaime del Rio, and she wanted to be a wife and mother. That was what was expected in the 1920s of young girls in Mexico and probably everywhere, most places in the world. And so she married. She married Jaime. She got pregnant, and she had a devastating miscarriage. And the result was that she could never have a child. And for some women, that might have been absolutely a depressing, devastating event. But she somehow picked herself up. She started doing interpretive dance and different things. She always was interested in dance. And by a twist of fate, she met Edwin Carraway, who was a Hollywood director at a party in Mexico. And Carraway recognized in her a real talent, and he invited her to Hollywood. And her husband, Jaime, was anxious to go to Hollywood because he wanted to be a screenwriter. And so they went to Hollywood, and it didn't go so well for Jaime, but Dolores was an instant success because at this time, Hollywood was looking for someone to be a female Latin lover. Ruta Valentino was very, very popular. He was a real moneymaker for the studios, and they wanted a female Latin lover, and she met all the requirements. I mean, she was gorgeous. She was so gorgeous that a committee of experts, including all kinds of producers and medical experts, they decided that she was the most beautiful woman in the whole world.
Yeah.
Which, wow. So she goes to Hollywood, and she's successful. The fact that she doesn't speak English perfectly is not an issue because films, don't forget, in 1925 are silent. But then what happens in 1927? Then there's an obstacle because then talkies come in. And many film stars, including native speakers of English, have problems making this transition. But amazingly, Dolores del Rio did not. They called her La Gata, the cat, because she always landed on her feet, and she always found a way. And she found a way to deal with this as well. She started playing roles for foreigners. She played a Russian, she played a Brazilian, she played a French woman. She played foreigners, roles in which her accent was not was not a real issue. But don't forget, we're talking about 1927, 1928. Americans were not so sophisticated, and the difference between a Brazilian accent and a Mexican accent, which I think people who work in this field, you know, they would pick it up right away, but just as long as they had an accent, they were foreign, so that was okay. So things went well for her, although it did put a strain on her marriage, that she was successful and Jaime was not. But where she met with another really important obstacle, and that was something that everybody met with, and that was when we moved into the 30s. Hitler in Germany, and of course Stalinism in Russia, and Dolores was in a situation, as many foreign actors and actresses were, where she couldn't get a job. She was considered box office poison because the American public became very xenophobic. There was a distrust of foreigners in general, and so people like Marlene Dietrich found herself without being able to get the kind of work that she was used to having. So Marlene Dietrich was an amazing woman, and she's also in this book. She did something that's really almost unbelievable. She stood up to Hitler. Hitler wanted to recruit her to make propaganda films for him. She refused to do it. Not only that, I mean, Hitler sent Goebbels to convince her to make propaganda films for him. I mean, she was risking her life by saying no, and she said no. Not only that, she became an American citizen, and since she couldn't find a job in the movies, she spent the next several years entertaining the troops behind the lines and taking some really big risks. So Lola, what did Lola do? Lola went back to Mexico, and this was the time when the golden age of Mexican cinema was beginning. And people like Emilio Fernandez were making these amazing films, and the cinematographers like Gabriel Figueroa, who had just incredible technique. If you see these films, they're breathtaking. And Lola really, she wanted to make more meaningful films. In Hollywood, she was making silly films. They're good for a laugh, but they really were. You know, you can't watch these films too many times because they really are silly. So she went to Mexico, and she wanted to make meaningful films, and she did. She made a number of meaningful films, and Maria Candelaria won the Golden Palm. It wasn't called the Golden Palm then, but at the Cannes Film Festival, and it was the first Latin American film to win, and it was the first Mexican film to be presented. So she went on and had a wonderful career. So I think that should answer your question.
Yes, I love so much how you have the characters between your novels, like Frida and Lola, dialogue with each other, and that you have these cameos, that Lola appears in Frida, and that Frida has a couple of scenes, but particularly one, a very salacious scene called chocolate. Some stuff going to but it's just wonderful that we enter in this world of Hollywood with the details, with a sense of space, a sense of place, a sense of atmosphere of the time. It's extraordinary how you have managed to depict this and to render it, to make it so alive. So
I did grow up in Los Angeles. So
well, so did many other people, and didn't write such great books.
Not at that time. As I always tell my students, I'm old, but not that.
Yeah, so this goes along with your other career as a scholar, as a researcher. We have a lot of things in common. We're both creative artists and scholars and educators. So you have just won this very prestigious prize, the Gemela Prize, for Best Scholarly Book on Early Modern Hispanic Women. Yay. And you have a solid body of scholarship, in addition to being an award-winning best-selling fiction authors. So how do you combine your scholarly writing with your fiction? I know this question has been asked of me as well at my events.
Well, I have to say that when I'm doing scholarly work and creative writing, I do more, because you reach a point where you really get tired of working on 16th century nuns, no matter how much you love them. And I do love them, but but then there comes a time when you say, gosh, I'd like to do something else. So then you pick up your novel and you work on your novel. I have been lucky in that I've been able to use a lot of the research that I do for my scholarly work for my novels. So for Frida and Miss Del Rio, I taught courses in Latin American culture and civilization for a long time, and of course the Mexican Revolution was a big topic, and both of these women lived during this period, right, the post-revolutionary period in Mexico. So a lot of the work that I did for, to prepare my classes and to prepare lectures, I used a lot of that in my novels. When I wrote Sister Teresa, which is about Teresa de Avila, I also published almost at the same time a book called Lettered Woman, Teresa de Avila, Lettered Woman, which is about Teresa's letters. And I spent a lot of time in convents and libraries reading these old documents. Some of them hadn't been touched for 400 years. It was really exciting to do that. But a lot of that information went into my writing Lettered Woman, and then it also went into my writing Sister Teresa, which was a novel that came out just, I think, about a year afterwards. One of the topics that I've researched the most is early modern Spanish women, and when I wrote I Am Venus, which is actually about Velázquez, the painter Diego Velázquez, but it's really more about the women in his world. So that's how I combine it. To me, there has never been a conflict. It's never been, gosh, I have to do this or I have to do that. It's always been
very fluid.
An exchange. It's been very fluid. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's been the same for me. They feed into each other. The scholarly work and the fictional work, and yeah, there is not much of a line, of a dividing line, at least for us, because often I think, particularly in academia, when you're a scholar and then writing fiction appears somehow.
When I first started writing fiction,
right,
I was told by my department chair, who's not here, not to mention it on my. I guess when I applied for full professor, not to mention it, because that kind of thing didn't count, and we were not supposed to be writing fiction. Right. We were supposed to be writing scholarship.
Right.
And the amount of research that goes into writing, a novel like Sister Teresa or I Am Venus or Miss Del Rio is enormous. But I have to say, it's also a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, well, I mean, scholarship and writing fiction, they're both fun. But writing fiction is fun in a very special way, and that is when you're writing scholarship, you're dealing with facts, right? You have to know when things happened, you have to know what happened, you have to know who did it, but when you're writing fiction, you have to know that, but you also have to know what people wore, what they ate, what they did in their free time, and that is really interesting to delve into. So so when you're writing a book like Women, Religious and Epistolary Exchange in the Carmelite Reform, you don't really, and that was not my title for this book. That was the publisher's title. You don't have to be concerned with what kind of underwear nuns were wearing, right? But if you're writing a book like I Am Venus or Miss Del Rio, you do have to know that. You have to dress your characters. You have to know what goes into dressing them. You have to know what they, when they had a few minutes free, what they did, where they went, what they liked to eat, what was available to eat. You have to know, for example, if you're writing about the 17th century, that there will be a lot of meat dishes, but no salads on the table. Because if you make a mistake, believe me, there's somebody out in the audience who knows it and who will write to you and say, you made a mistake. Yeah.
I think in the world of fiction, I've encountered also among fiction writers and publishers, there's the reverse snobbishness that if you're too academic, I know that is too, you cannot be too academic. It's almost like you have to leave out. You shouldn't even mention it. That's right. So good for us that we are breaking. We're breaking all these boundaries. What I found very interesting from the very beginning, and I think it gives a special flair and makes the book so moving, is that you tell the story of Lola, of Dolores del Rio, through the narrative, the voice of her childhood friend, Mara, who was from a very different class, from a peasant class, social class, and class did matter very much then. And then she ends up being, throughout all of Lola's career, her personal hairdresser.
Right.
And she friend, but sort of, that's a little bit of a tenuous relationship, because Mara often felt like Lola was using her and was calling her when she had an emergency. But it is a very complicated and very very interesting relationship. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the reasons for your choice or choosing to tell this story through this character, to make her the narrator. And what is the relationship here between fiction and actual history?
Well, when I started writing this book, I started writing it in the third person, and I felt that it was becoming a biography, and that wasn't what I wanted. And I thought that I needed a character who would lend some perspective to Dolores del Rio. Somebody who was close to her, somebody who admired her, but also was not so impressed with her, because she had known her since childhood and she knew what her weaknesses were. I think one thing that every author of historical fiction or biofiction has to come to terms with is the fact that you are not your character. Mm-hmm. You did not live in that period, and you don't know for sure how it was. I mean, I don't think we even know sometimes our own motivations or why we do certain things, but when we're talking about another person, I think you have to be really, really careful about ascribing thoughts and motivations and ideas to another person. And I respect the characters that I write about. I don't want to rob them of their agency, because they were all very strong people. They were all very strong women. And so I needed a character that would be kind of a buffer, that would create a distance between the reader and the character, and between me and the character, and add that element of subjectivity that is really intrinsic to any work of biofiction. And any work of anything is subjective, right? Even if I write a book of history, it's always subjective, because it always comes through, it's always filtered through our own way of seeing things. Daniel Kehlmann, who's a Austrian-German writer, and much younger than I am, which makes me very angry that he's so smart. But he once wrote, "There's no such thing as historical fiction," and his point was that we are always us, writing from our own perspective in our own time, and so we are never historical characters. We can do all the research in the world. We can do everything that we can to recapture the past, but we are not in the past. Okay, so we are not them. We are not they. We have some English teachers here, and we have to. And I think we have to be careful not to give the impression that we know what we can't possibly know. So a character like Mara gives me, as the author, the opportunity to talk about this character, but always recognizing that I don't know everything. So Mara makes comments about her, she makes assumptions about her, she makes judgments, but we always know that that's what they are, their opinions. And so I'm not presenting this as absolute truth, I'm presenting this as somebody's opinion. There was another reason that Mara was important to me, and that is, from my perspective, having grown up in Los Angeles and known a lot of people who went into the movies, a movie star's life is actually not that interesting, because what do movie stars do? They make, they have screenings and they have parties and they have love affairs and they have screenings and they have parties and they have love affairs. The average person doesn't really, that grows boring in a novel if that's all you're talking about. But Mara is a person who's much more like us, who's much more like the average reader. She gets married. She has a family. She has 4 daughters. When the Depression comes, her husband loses his job. When the war comes, she loses her husband. She has all the problems. When the polio epidemic comes, she's terrified for her children, just as we were terrified during our pandemic. Lola was buffered from all of that. She was very, very wealthy. She didn't have children, and she, when the war started, she left, and so she wasn't married at the time. So she went to Mexico. So this was a way, I think, to make the character more relatable and more. And to create what I wanted to do was create a character that was more like us, like most folks that have to deal with everyday problems. My own mother was when she started her career as a beautician, and they said beautician, they didn't say hairstylist then, and then she became a cosmetology teacher. Although I'm not a genius with my own hair, but I do know my way around a beauty shop because I was raised, kind of in that culture. So for me, Mara was an easy character to create. In that, I was there. I did that. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think as a favorite French writer of mine, Albert Camus once said, fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. So what you've just said makes so much sense, because ultimately, if you're a writer, a fiction writer, it's through the path of the imagination and the imaginary that you end up channeling and processing historical facts and giving them a truthfulness that you couldn't get from any history book or a biography. So on that line, the final question and also comment about the book that I'd like to pose here is that indeed you create such a vast panorama of people, of characters from all social classes, from all backgrounds, from all sexual orientations. Some are famous and well known, such as Orson Welles. She has an affair with Orson Welles. I never knew that, and he's described as this choleric, up and down, drug addicted, very impossible, self-centered person. And then many other characters. Ramon, who is a delightful character, is just a world. You create such a universe, such a world that is swarming with liveliness, with people, with such a diversity of people, and you make them come alive. So yes, I was wondering how much of this, how did you blend, and what your creative processes were in taking historical fact, historical people who have existed, and how much has been the work of your imagination, and how much comes from you. Maybe there's something of you yourself that you have put in it. I don't want to ask the autobiographical question, because people always ask that of writers, and I know I'm tired of it when people ask that of me, but it's you have managed to blend all of this in such a seamless and smooth way, and that's my last curiosity for tonight.
Well, as I said, I am researching this material all the time because I'm teaching it or writing articles about it. I think the most important thing that I always keep in mind when I'm writing is the fact that I am not the character that I am writing about. And I always ask myself, and I think this is how the process begins, what it would be like to know this character. What would it be like to know Dolores del Rio? What would it be like to listen to her, talk about her dinner parties and her screenings and her new movies and all of this, when you're worried about being able to put food on the table? What would that be like? When I wrote Sister Teresa, I asked myself, what would it be like to be friends with a person who claimed to levitate? I mean, what if Dominica suddenly levitated? What would that be like? But for the friends of Teresa de Avila, the nuns who lived in the convent with her, she had many friends. Many of them believed that she did levitate. What would that be like to know somebody like that? So I think that that the process and a question like that really puts you in the world of the person that you're writing about. It takes you away from where you are and puts you in that world, because if you are a friend of somebody in the 16th century, you think like a person in the 16th century. You don't think like a person in the 21st century. So I think my process starts there, and then it's hard work sitting down at that computer every day, and then being friends with the delete button and realizing, no, this is not working, and no, this is not working, and no, this is not working, and just keeping at it. I think perseverance is the key to getting anything done, but a novel is not an exception.
Well, ultimately, also, I think that this novel is it is about Dolores del Rio, but it's also about other themes and something else as well. It is about the highs and lows of celebrity and what goes on behind the person that you see on the screen. It is about crossing history and crossing historical periods that are harsh, like the war, World War II, like the Mexican Revolution, and how people have their characters tested. How do they come out? How do they survive very trying moments? How do they survive war, loss? So you tackle as always very deep, very profound themes. And on that note, if you allow me, I would like to read just a little passage that is right at the end of the book. Don't worry, it's no spoiler. I mean, you know already the story, right? That that Dolores Del Rio is no longer among us. Maybe she levitates somewhere around here.
She never claimed to levitate.
But this is very down to earth. Coming down to earth from levitation. So the book ends with a celebration in honor of Dolores Del Rio. It's called Mexico City, 1975, Forever Lola. And she is the guest of honor. She's the star, and she gives a speech at the end that is absolutely moving and beautiful. And I did detect some of you in it, because you are very much like what you're going to hear, to see that Dolores Del Rio was also not so much the star, but something else. And she says, "When the newspapers write about me, what do they say? Even at her age, she's still beautiful. But what is beauty? Real beauty does not come from creams or lotions, but from thoughts and deeds. When we devote our lives to helping others, we become beautiful. When I die, I want them to write, 'She was a beautiful woman,' not because I still have high cheekbones, but because I accomplished something worthwhile during my lifetime."
Thank you.
That's very beautiful.
One thing I'd like to mention about Dolores Del Rio, which I didn't, but I think is very important. She was a woman who wanted to do good. She was a woman who cared, and at the end of her life, she started a system of daycare chain of daycare centers in Mexico. There had never been anything like that. At the time, these daycare centers were for the women of the women who worked in the studios and in the film industry, and a lot of these women came from the countryside, and the usual practice was for them to come to the countryside. In the country where they lived, they had help. They had mothers, they had sisters, they had aunts, they had
Extended family.
extended family, right? They had even a local priest. There was somebody always to go to. They get to Mexico City. It's a huge city, and they don't have anybody, to leave their kids with, and they leave them in guarderías, which are guardar means to keep, and they're just holding pens basically. They have this one woman. There's 40 kids, and the kids are just there. And the women who are taking care of them are, and they're not educated necessarily to do this kind of work. And Dolores Del Rio realized that this was a real problem for these women, and so she, with Maria Felix, whom she reputedly hated, but she actually didn't. They were actually friends. Good publicity, but they worked together, and they put together enough money to start these daycare centers. And she said they were not going to be called guarderías, because here, she said, "Aquí no guardamos a nadie." We're not going to keep people. We're gonna educate these children. And she took it very seriously. She read Jean Piaget. She read Maria Montessori. She read whatever she could about early childhood education. And she then started these centers with real teachers in them to take care of these kids, and give them a start, to give them an education, to give them nurturing, to read to them, and that was really a revolutionary thing that she did. It was something that hadn't been done in Mexico, hadn't been done hardly anywhere. So I think if I want to leave you with the image of Dolores Del Rio as not just a pretty face, but a woman who really accomplished something.
Yeah, and also another aspect, if I may say one more thing that really moved me and with which I connected very deeply, is the drama and the struggle she's going through when she's in the United States and in Hollywood as a foreigner, and how she's made to feel as a foreigner, as an immigrant myself. I saw you got it just right. And if I may humbly, speaking of foreigners, my recent memoir is also for sale here. It's called Dream in a Suitcase. And it has a beautiful endorsement by Bárbara Mujica, who has always supported me, and she is extraordinary. I've never met anyone like Bárbara Mujica who supports other women's works and promotes them. And we promote each other. And just like Dolores del Rio, such satisfaction comes from coming out of yourself and giving to others and supporting others, particularly among women. Thank you.
Yeah, Barbara, you alluded early on that her husband, when they moved to Hollywood, he has these high aspirations, and then it doesn't come to fruition. So he's with her during the highs, but do you cover sort of what he's about in the book?
I mean, it's in the book. I couldn't go into all of her husband's
Also, they go back
but-
to Mexico, and now it's initially her lows, but then she immediately has stardom. But does he become
Yeah,
See, I guess in the book.
Jaime, she meets with stardom almost immediately because she is the new female Latin lover, but he wants to be a scriptwriter, and he really has no talent. At least that is the opinion of the people who are judging his scripts. And so the other problem is that Caraway, who brings Lola to Hollywood, he's in love with her, and he doesn't want to help Jaime. He gives him all these menial jobs. He tells him, he wants him to read, and he wants him to file scripts and this kind of thing. He doesn't really give him a chance. But from everything I've read, Jaime really didn't have much talent as a screenwriter. So and also he had homosexual tendencies. He had boyfriends, and there are all kinds of things that are explained in the book that I didn't go into. But he finally decided that he couldn't. He's the one who decided he just really couldn't take this anymore, and he left. And then Dolores married again, and that was a very short-lived marriage. I don't think I'll go into that in detail. But then she took up with Orson Welles, and he was much younger than she, very glamorous. In that, he was the wunderkind. He did, he made these incredible movies. He did, the War of the Worlds and all these kinds of things. But he was under such pressure. He started taking drugs, and he was really addicted to drugs. And he a brilliant filmmaker. If you've seen Citizen Kane or any of his movies, he was really an amazing filmmaker, but very difficult to live with. And then finally, towards the end of her life, she met Lou Riley, who was American. He was from a wealthy family. They had the yacht club in Acapulco, and then she finally met her mate. Well, her mate.
Yeah, her mate.
And that worked out for her. But it wasn't just smooth sailing. It wasn't just happiness all the way through. Jaime's story is sad. It's a sad story.
And then one quick question. In the end, when you discussed the early, I guess, back in the Montessori school and that, the early works of that, her being so involved early in the world development and that sort of early education and opportunity, is there any one event or something in her life which moves her to that cause?
I think that she realized at the end of her life that Mexico, in spite of the revolution, which was supposed to bring about equality, it didn't. So Mexico does have a large middle class, and it did have a larger middle class than many other Latin American countries. But she looked around her, and she saw poverty everywhere. And she looked at the women who were working in the studios, and she saw that they didn't have any place to leave their kids. So she doesn't mention, or I haven't seen mention of any particular aha moment, but this was something that bothered her. During her whole life, she said that she wanted to do something worthwhile. She wanted to make movies that were worthwhile, and she felt finally in Mexico she could make movies that were worthwhile because these were socially relevant movies, which is not what she was making in Hollywood. the situation was in the States, people wanted to get away from the war. They didn't want to think too hard about. I mean, there was the Depression. People wanted escapism, and that's the kind of movies that were being made. But in Mexico, there was a whole. The Mexican Revolution was more than just a political movement. It was an artistic movement, and it affected literature. If you look at books like Los de Abajo, The Underdogs by Mariano Azuela, and the muralists Diego Rivera, Orozco, Siqueiros, and I mean, in the film I mentioned Fernandez, Emilio Fernandez. It affected everything, and she wanted to be part of that.
There are a couple of aha moments towards the end where she drives and with her husband, her last husband, and she says, "Look at this. We talk about Mexico, they brought equality, but look at all the poor children." And then she goes and interrogates, actually interviews the women that were working, the seamstresses. Do you have children? How many? And one says 4, one says 3, one says 6. So at some point she got it. She understood that there's so much suffering around her, and she felt very committed, and her husband is like, "Well, you cannot save the world now, but I can do something for the people here." So yeah, that's very beautiful that you bring out that side of her.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, then a huge thank you. This was such a wonderful conversation. So